All right, Catherine, I do believe it's a good time to go live and start the show. Off to you.
Well, thank you very much, Nadia. I was just making sure that in the spirit of 2020, 2021, I was not on mute. But hello, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Welcome to the latest edition of the FCM Collective. Mon nom est Catherine Clark et je suis ravie d'être parmi vous ce matin. I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to be with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, one of my favorite organizations. You know, when we came on this morning, everyone was saying hello from across the country, and there is a real feeling that, you know, this is a community of people who gather together to try to find good solutions that help everyone. So just a real honor to be a part of it. I'm pleased to be here for today's discussion about the dynamics that are powering, in particular, rural communities, from agriculture to economic growth to environmental sustainability. And we're also going to be talking about how local leaders are at the forefront of that effort. Because as local leaders, and especially rural leaders, you know how important Canada's rural communities are to the health and to the strength of this country. 1/3 of Canada's GDP comes from rural communities. Some 10 million Canadians live outside of census metropolitan areas. And too often, our national conversation can miss the amazing innovation, the leadership, and the strength of rural Canada. FCM is committed to Canada's rural communities and to supporting them and all of you in the work that you do to keep your communities strong. And FCM is pleased to be working in collaboration with our partners, the Egg Farmers of Canada, Chicken Farmers of Canada, Turkey Farmers of Canada, and Canadian hatching egg producers as part of today's conversation. Nous avons des invités exceptionnels et je vais les présenter sous peu. But just before I introduce our terrific guests, I have a few housekeeping items to review. First of all, I just want to note that there is simultaneous translation for this workshop. Alors, la traduction simultanée est disponible pour cet événement. N'hésitez pas à poser votre question en anglais ou en français, ou vous pouvez utiliser le chat pour faire ça. And in order to choose either English or French for this discussion, you'll note that there's a globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I know you're all old hands at Zoom at this point, but just so you know, you can go to the globe icon, and that's how you choose the language of your choice for today. Of course, English or French. Now, I'll be addressing questions to our esteemed panelists throughout the conversation today, but we are also integrating a few polling questions into the conversation. So we'd be really delighted if you take the time to answer those polls, because your answers help us gain a bit broader, perhaps a clearer understanding of today's important topic. It's just a little bit more interactive for us as well. And just so you know, those polling questions will appear automatically on your screen. Also, this session is being recorded. It will be available on demand on the FCM website. And finally, we ask that the comments in the chat be respectful. I know they will be, but just asking that at the forefront of this conversation. And if there's time for us to get to some of the questions that were submitted by audience members at registration, we will absolutely do so. And thank you to those of you who did submit questions. But now finally, I'm thrilled to introduce our guests. Catherine Doan is a first-generation turkey farmer in Oxford County, Ontario. She is a business professional, community volunteer, and director of agcareers.com and careersinfood.com. And she is a self-described passionate advocate for promoting the goodness of local food. Hello, Catherine, welcome.
Thank you for having me here today.
Well, we're thrilled. Tim Lambert is the CEO of the Egg Farmers of Canada. EFC is a longtime partner of FCM, and many of you know Egg Farmers of Canada from their participation in FCM's annual conference, which we are all missing being a part of in person. It is great to have you here with us, Tim.
My pleasure. Hello, everyone.
And Paul McLaughlin is a professional biologist and has been an environmental scientist and consultant for over 26 years. He's a fourth-term county councillor and is currently the Reeve of Ponoka County and the president of the Rural Municipalities of Alberta. Welcome, Paul.
Good morning, Catherine. Glad to be here.
Oh, we're thrilled to have you. And last, of course, but not least, is David Mitchell, Mayor of the town of Bridgewater, Nova Scotia, a proud rural leader. Mayor Mitchell has been at the forefront of many key initiatives that have helped drive Bridgewater to become the strong center of economic, social, and sustainable leadership that it is today. Welcome to you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you for having me.
Well, welcome to all of you. It is great to have you as a part of this discussion, and you're going to be bringing your thoughts and your expertise and hopefully a lot of candor to the conversation that we're having. I have an initial question for each of you. I'm going to encourage you to share your thoughts in 2 minutes or less, just so that we have enough time to get to as many questions as possible. But let's get the conversation underway. And I'm going to start with you, Mayor Mitchell. We're going to take a look through your lens, if you don't mind, at why you think rural Canada is at the leading edge of economic innovation.
It's an interesting question. I think after years of perhaps not being at the forefront of innovation, we're seeing this huge shift at the rural level. Some has been driven by necessity, and whether it was the outmigration of young people or the pandemic itself, regardless though, it's been driven by people. I think they're pushing for communities to address important issues like climate change, employment opportunities, and housing security. So because of that, we're seeing this incredible innovation when it comes to things like new business ideas, craft breweries, distilleries, and small communities, just as an example. And then that leads to some local post-secondary institutions that then start to offer new courses in these sectors. Rural municipalities have this great advantage, and that's that we're nimble. So whether it's things like innovative zoning to enhance the housing options for people, or policies that reduce the carbon footprint of municipalities, I think we tend to be able to pivot quicker to address the challenges that we face. And that means that we can lead and be ahead of perhaps larger centers. For municipalities themselves, and I think you mentioned it, Catherine, we're not in the same spotlight or receive the same funding support from other levels of government, which means we tend to need to find alternatives and innovative solutions to issues that we face. And many times we need to have made at home solutions for these, because we just can't draw the larger companies. For example, my community may go out for a tender for something and no one may respond. So we have to find, the problem doesn't go away, we have to find the solution ourselves. So for our community, we learned energy poverty was an issue. And so we had to build a solution from scratch. And the result, which is really cool, is now going to be a template used around the globe. And so rural communities like ours are on the cutting edge of various issues, and I certainly don't see that shifting back anytime soon.
You know, your comments are so interesting, because I think the truth of the matter is, and people in rural communities, rural leaders would know that rural communities have always been on the forefront of innovation, partly because that's what you had to do. You had to solve problems, you had to move forward, you had to find creative solutions. So really interesting comments. Thank you very much. Let's move to Tim Lambert. So Tim, egg and poultry farmers are at the forefront of rural Canada's leadership on agri-food and on food security, which is a really important topic for a lot of people, a lot of Canadians. Can you talk to us about why you're hopeful for the future in regards to this particular conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Catherine. You know, it's you learn something through every tough experience. And of course, COVID, as tough as it continues to be, you know, is really no different. You learn from it. And you see the challenges that we've faced with everything from PPE to vaccines. And it really underscores the need for food security, that Canadians want and need local food. And the interesting thing with our coalition, with our supply managed groups, which I know sometimes is not well understood, but it provides tremendous stability within the farms and the farm families. And we have farms right from Newfoundland to Vancouver Island. We even have an egg farm, in our case, in the Northwest Territories. So you've got stable farms right across the country. So you have that local, stable supply of food. And coming out of COVID, I don't see that being a lesson soon forgotten by Canadians. And I think what I would add to that is, because of that stability and security, we are part of your community fabric in rural communities. And through this, I know that right from food banks, egg industries donated about 10 million eggs through COVID. I know that the turkey industry has supported a kids helpline. I know the chicken industry has donated thousands and thousands of dollars to food banks. And so we live and work in your communities, we're stable, and we're part of that food secure network that we need now, today, more than ever, and need it going in the future. So it's actually hard not to be hopeful and optimistic about that.
Yeah, those are such interesting points, Tim, because, at the beginning of the pandemic, especially, other than a run on toilet paper globally, people were really concerned about their food, how they were going to get it, where it was going to come from, the stable supply, et cetera. And what you've outlined, you've touched on that, but you've also touched on the fact that you're giving back to communities across the country as well. So, so great points, and thank you for that. Paul McLaughlin, we're going to go to you, and I'd love to get your thoughts on what we don't talk enough about when we talk about rural Canada. So when I ask that, I mean perhaps a challenge or an underrated strength or something that you think just deserves more praise.
Thank you, Catherine. You know, my favorite word about rural Canada is stewardship. It's the word about we're stewards of the land, stewards of the energy, and stewards of the care of our livestock. And as Tim had mentioned, the food security conversation. And the fact is that I think that there's this whole concept around nature-based solutions to climate change, ecosystem goods and services. And really, as stewards of the land, we're providing the benefits that are borne by all Canadians, the cleaning of the water, the air, carbon sequestration, and really looking at even taking a step back. The fact is that rural Canada actually can provide the mitigation for floods. We can address some of the issues related to drought. So as stewards of land, it's something we just do. And I think that it's interesting because your average farmer really isn't considering the great services they're providing to the rest of Canada and to the rest of Canadians as well. And acknowledging that, having that conversation, and not only just doing that, doing it better. And I think that there's tremendous opportunities to have rural Canada really provide us that path forward, addressing these world issues of climate change, clean water, clean air, and actually using what we do as stewards of the land, using what we're doing right now and actually building upon that, making that better, using technology and a better understanding. And I think that's such an exciting dialogue to have with the rest of Canada, saying, hey, you know what? We're here to work together to take care of all the things that are critically important to Canadians. And at the same time, we can do this together. And actually, as we move forward in the future, I think it's going to be a critical relationship we should build upon.
Yeah, excellent points, because the truth of the matter is that once we finally escape the grips of this pandemic, we are going to be focusing on other major conversations that have earned a little less airtime. Climate change, the environment, sustainability are, the huge issues of our time. And you've just brought up the very important point that the conversation we're having today is within that framework. So, so thank you for that. Catherine Down, we're going to go to you as a farmer. Can you talk to us about where you see opportunities to strengthen Canadians' connection to rural Canada and to the idea of made in Canada food? What do we need to do better? What do we need to do differently?
Sure. Obviously, as a member of almost every community, farmers such as myself, coast to coast, have been supporting local initiatives, and overall, many in the sector have stepped up, especially in this past year. So I'll speak more specifically as a close-knit farmer in southwestern Ontario, that community. I value the connection with obviously my fellow farmers, individuals, and families. But above all, I listen. What they have to say, help them have a voice when it comes to their thoughts and values on the importance of local high-quality food. For example, I work with an organization called Agscape, which is providing our local schools with factual, balanced curriculum linked food literacy information and resources to both our teachers and their students. And being involved in my community has been very rewarding, and I can see the impact that it has from people understanding agriculture firsthand and the respect that they have when they make that connection. So the jobs that are created, obviously, there's an improvement opportunity there. You mentioned, obviously, I work with Ag Careers and careersinfood.com, and it really takes a look at connecting individuals with careers they would never in the past probably consider. But if we can attract them to rural communities for those roles, it's an area of opportunity. So really what I'm saying is if we can strengthen some of the programs that are in existence by supporting organizations like Agscape, agriculture really provides stability. We have a very low percentage of Canadians that actually produce food, but we know 100% of people eat it. So the pandemic, I think, has drawn more of an attention to where our food comes from. So I'll speak specifically as a turkey farmer, we are getting more questions. So we've developed a Doan Family Turkey website, a Facebook page, Instagram. We've taken part on virtual farm tours to really invite people in to understand, and I like to joke, talk turkey to me on social media so that we can represent the thousands of farmers that are across Canada that take pride in producing that safe quality food that is Canadian.
I really love that, Catherine. I think that's fantastic. And I think that those are, super 21st century approaches to ensuring that people understand what goes into this way of life and to producing food that we eat. Knowing where it comes from, all those important things that occasionally, perhaps more than we would like, get missed. So really great. I'm going to have to go take a turkey tour.
Excellent.
Well, it's been a really interesting overview that you've all shared so far, and we're only 20 minutes in, so we have a lot to discuss, and I'd love to involve our audience now too. We have our first polling question, and it's a polling question on rural economic growth. And you're going to be seeing it appear on your screen. There it is. The question is, I'll just read it in case some of you need to fetch your reading glasses like I normally do. What is your community's greatest economic strength? I'll ask that you only answer one question or pick one answer. And then while you're voting, I'm going to ask our panel guests for their answers as well. So the options are resilience, creativity, natural assets, community spirit. So we'll leave the poll open for 30 seconds. And while you're voting, why don't we start with you, David? What would you choose?
Oh my gosh, I can't choose just one.
I know, it's hard.
I mean, the pandemic has really shined a bright light on this community. So I'm so impressed with their creativity. So small businesses that never thought of things like curbside pickup or even deliveries. We live in a small town of 8,700 people. You can walk everywhere. So their creativity and how to reach their customers, their resilience. So we were very fortunate that we were able to remain almost business as usual throughout the pandemic. And then that community spirit just kind of highlights everything, because we had people delivering casseroles to neighbors, making sure seniors were okay, people whose family were outside of the province who couldn't see them because of the borders being closed, just making sure that they weren't alone. So those would be the ones I would choose. Sorry, I can't pick one.
Okay, I'm seeing we're letting you have more flexibility than we are, our audience. Catherine, can you give us your sense? Do you have one or multiple?
I'll follow the rules and pick one.
We're throwing you under the bus, David.
I'm used to it.
Yeah, if you can't laugh, you can't do anything. So I would say community spirit. Honestly, in our area, Norwich is a very special community, the township of Norwich. The amount of support for our local school system, the amount of support through different channels when it comes to learning about agriculture, as I mentioned, the questions that are asked in the sense of community support of people in need, that local produce being delivered. We've seen opportunities pop up in that regards, and the amount of support in that respect has been very interesting. I'll give you an example. Our local school does, it's called Play Date with Emily Stowe every year. And the amount of businesses and local parents, grandparents, community members that support that event to be able to give back to the students because they recognize the connection of really investing in the future. Really just, you can't hardly explain it unless you've been to something like that. And they although we can't be in person, they have adapted that model and continue to support the school system and the needs of the students there. One of the initiatives was an outdoor enhancement learning space. And part of that was the ability to connect students with the environment, having an understanding of that outdoor space so that they could obviously learn. And it's been a real blessing and foresight of our community spirit bringing together, because they have that space now, and it was all this community spirit that made that happen.
Paul, what about you? It sounds very clearly like none of us can just pick one.
I'm much like David, who's actually a rebel and doesn't follow rules. But I'm going to force myself to follow. I love the word resilience, and I'm an environmental scientist, so resilience is everything. But, you know, just imagine a year ago today, just imagine. So a year ago today, my kids, they closed schools, and we sat there with the uncertainty of what's going to go on. And what did we all do? My community just said, okay, anyways, we got to get back to work. We need to feed the animals. I need to talk to my screen all day. Whatever it takes, we still need to move forward. And I think, truth be told, it's amazing. You're sort of in this war-like setting of uncertainty, but at the same time, we're okay. And COVID sucks, don't get me wrong, but we're okay. Like, we are all in this together. And the leveling of the conversations and the leveling, the fact that everybody came under this basically realization that we're all in this together. And I think resilience is such a magical word, because if you think about it, there's more to come. We have more struggles, but are you finding it's getting easier? You're finding that you're just knocking yourself off and getting it done. I'm an Albertan, so we stumble and fall. You know what an Albertan does is we get back on. And I ride horses, and you know what? When I fall off my horse, my wife's yelling at me, get back on that horse. Because sometimes I'm not happy with the horse, because why did I fall off? Because it couldn't have been my fault. But anyways, the fact is that we have just gotten back on our horse. We're moving forward as a community, and it's strengthened who we are as a community. And I think it's been fantastic. We will look upon this, and we will probably forget some of the pain and remember some of the good. I'm hoping we're doing that, because already I am. Already my community's better, and my community's tougher. And I think that we're not only tougher, we're more compassionate than I think we might have been before COVID happened.
I love how positive all of these answers are. Tim, over to you.
Well, I too was looking for the all of the above button. Seeing it's not there, I guess I would echo Catherine in the comments around community spirit. And I just kind of build on what I had said earlier. I'd referenced the egg industry donating upwards of 10 million eggs. But Canadian Hatching Eggs, their producers donated over $70,000 to Food Banks Canada. Turkey farmers over 150,000 to support kids. Help Phone supported 4-H Canada, and several other charities involved in supporting youth in rural communities. Chicken farmers just in Ottawa alone donated over $30,000 to Ottawa Food Bank. But then there was provincial initiatives. I know, for example, that the chicken farmers in Manitoba donated 1,000 chickens a week to Winnipeg Harvest, and chicken farmers in Ontario have donated 1.6 million meals to Ontario Food Bank. So, you know, I kind of, you see the impact that COVID had on people and families and children. And I think for us, that would be where I would, if I had forced to pick, and I was, that's the one I would pick.
All right, well, let's see what our audience thinks too. Let's bring up our poll results. So our winner actually is our natural assets. That's super interesting. But some of the comments in the chat indicate that everyone wanted a all of the above button too. So terrific. That's really great. I'm glad that everyone took part in that voting, and thanks for the comments as well from our panel guests. And building on the poll response and moving forward with the conversation, let's dive into the topic of economic growth and of perseverance. We talked about resilience in the poll and in some of the comments that were made after that. So David, what are some of the key considerations for boosting economic output in a rural municipality?
I think without question, you have to start with reliable power and internet. This is still a challenge in so many rural communities. I'm fortunate to be in a town that has internet speeds that match Halifax and Toronto, for example. but the rural municipalities that surround my town, a high percentage of people don't have access to cell phone signal, internet, and you know, if a storm looks at you funny, their power is out, and so you can't compete with the world if you're not connected to the world. And so it's getting better, but we're nowhere near where we need to be. The other thing is you can't boost economic output without people. And so I think post-pandemic, there's a huge opportunity for rural Canada. As the world quickly shifted to working from home, many of our large urban centers are still in that stay-at-home state, while lots of rural communities across the country are, as I said before, kind of back to or close to a business as usual. So this outmigration from cities into rural centers presents an opportunity, but we have to leverage that and support and embrace those people and their ideas as they settle into rural Canada. So that also means that in rural communities, services and programs are key. So internet alone isn't enough if you don't have the amenities that are going to draw or retain these people. So whether it's recreation, shopping, dining, all those things that people expect to have in their community, we as rural communities need to offer that, so that we can take advantage of this shift from urban to rural. So at the end of the day, though, if you want a lasting rural economic boost, you have to start with the people and build from there.
Yeah, and it's interesting, David, because you're mentioning some of the comments that were made in questions submitted by our audience when they registered as well. Several mentioning the fact of needing reliable internet service as well, broadband, in order to be able to effectively compete and do business. Tim, can you give us your thoughts on this as well in terms of considerations for boosting economic output in a rural municipality?
For sure, and I guess there's two primary points I'd like to make, but I'm going to start with the point being what the alternative looks like to strong rural communities in Canada. I do a lot of work internationally, both in developing countries, but I spend a lot of time in the United States as well. And you see a real hollowing out of rural America, because what's happened there is they've been, just because of low farm profitability, driven into massive economies of scale. And so that forces this huge, just use a simple example, the average size egg farm in Canada is about 23,000 birds, which probably sounds big to a lot of people, but in the US, it's closer to 2 million birds on average. And so what you have is this huge concentration in certain towns, and it draws the people and the jobs away from the neighboring towns. And you have these almost ghost towns. But then you also create the problem that are associated with massive industrial scale farming around the environment, food safety. If you had some sort of outbreak or problem, an entire massive complex goes on, you don't have the diversity. So consider the alternative to the fabric we have in Canada, which is my second point. So this balance in Canada between supply managed commodities and export oriented commodities right across this country. And there's a real strength to that mix. The strength is this: when export prices for a commodity are low and certain commodities are struggling, which happened in things like the pork industry, et cetera, over the years. But then you still have your poultry and egg farmers who are still going to the local feed mill. They're still going to the local farm machinery dealership. They're still buying their trucks and cars. They're still supporting local restaurants and local businesses. And then they still have the vet services, and all of that rural farming infrastructure remains intact. And then when the opportunities come roaring back for our export-oriented commodities, guess what? They still have that rural infrastructure that they need that helps them be competitive. So you really need to have that diversity and mix so that you keep strong farming communities from coast to coast. And I know from being elsewhere, that's unique.
Catherine and Paul, sorry, do you have something else that you wanted to add?
No, I said it's to be cherished that
Yes.
we have that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the international perspective on that too is an important point. Catherine, why don't we bring in your thoughts on this too?
Tim actually leads me quite well into this, because obviously as a farmer in my community, I've seen firsthand how my operation makes a positive impact on the vibrancy of my community. And stable farm support other businesses in our communities, from the feed mill to purchasing equipment to offering jobs. And really, farmers by and large still value relationships, and so much information can be garnered from a distance, but there's definitely a need for local businesses to support. And in my mind, that is critical. So with a profitable farm, paying fair wages to employees, obviously, suppliers, and our small town then benefits from that. It keeps the schools open, a local grocery store, a hardware store, and obviously is viable in return to coexist for the well-being and attract other non-farm families to settle into our area. And overall, really, it just does fuel the employment and contributes to the local economy, and provides obviously the population with local nutritious food, which is what they are looking for. I think obviously I can't say this to this group because they know it already, but rural communities are interconnected. Our vet knows the truck driver, our inspector knows the feed supplier. They all work together. Our children go to the same school. The teachers shop at our grocery store, and then they purchase the turkey that we are producing as farmers. So when I look at expanding our operation, changing things on our farm, I look to our local network, knowing that it creates that economic activity. So I would say that programs that were developed, such as Feeding Your Future, to show the career opportunities that are available in agriculture and food, those programs are really important. But I will say it again, without broadband, that's been mentioned, it's very difficult to recruit and retain staff members to rural areas if they don't have the basic necessities that allow them to connect with their education needs, you know, and their job requirement needs. So I think, to summarize, think of agriculture as the economic development opportunity. We're not just plows and dirt. Farms create stable jobs. We've seen that through the pandemic, that agriculture has provided stability, and we're just trying to meet the demands of the consumer. So support and just a focus on that, I think, would answer that question, obviously, when it comes to how to boost the economic input in our areas.
Yeah, terrific points. Paul?
I'm going to answer this in two parts. So my first part is I'm on the board of governors for Olds College, which is a technical agricultural college. So, and they have smart agriculture. So they're basically coding for farming. They're actually solving the problems using current technology. We'll deal with the innovation piece later. But one of the things I think to make us economically viable from rural Alberta and rural Canada standpoint is letting kids know that, wait, there's tech and agriculture. They're converging. And they need to converge in order for us to move forward. But the second part of mine is really about that trade. I think we need to recognize that we have two things, and I think domestic food security is a critical piece, and it's an important conversation. But actually, external trade and export security is critical to small town rural Canada. It's to these small farms, because you need to have security in exporting the market. You need to have the mechanisms in place to move foods to market, and be able to have that consistency on how you move the product to market too as well. I was actually meeting with a special envoy from China, and China views Canada as clean. And we all know it's clean, but when I say clean, healthy, safe, and that is a brand that is exported, can be a fantastic opportunity. But in order for us to keep that market and actually get out to the market, we need to make sure that our roads, our rail have the capacity to move product to market. We have certainty around trade. And so it's amazing how trade disputes at the highest of levels affect rural Alberta at the smaller level. And so if we can understand, and exactly as Tim and Catherine and David had said, how this is important to when we're all interconnected, this external trade conversation is so critical. We need certainty in trade, we need certainty in prices, and we need to make sure that we can provide that supply and have that resiliency in the system to allow us to make sure that we can not only get it to market, but we can grow it and get it done. And the tech will provide us that certainty around how we're best using resources and more efficiency. But we need to have that trade security and that export security in order to make sure we have a market for the foods we produce. If you folks spend some time looking at rural Canada, we punch so above our weight. We create so much goods and services per person. It is hard to even imagine. And the fact, if you look at the lentil market that comes out of Manitoba, if you actually look at the wheat market that comes out of Alberta, and the dairy and the egg that we provide per capita, small farm production is so high. At the same time, we produce so much that we need to also get to markets. We need to make sure those systems are in place to create that uncertainty too as well.
Well, let's turn to a topic that we discussed a little bit closer to the beginning, and that's climate change and the natural environment. It's a huge issue for every sector, for every region. In rural communities, of course, they don't only champion environmental stewardship, and that was a word that was specifically noted earlier on, but they live it. Paul, quickly, can you give us some thoughts on the critical lessons that are being learned in rural Canada that more Canadians should be aware of when it comes to these issues?
Well, imagine, I think that we're talking about climate events or weather events. So the conversation we're having in parts of rural Canada is you can have flood and drought in the same year. So imagine that you're in a situation now of periodic chaos, that I'm in a year that my rain will come in one day. We've seen that. You've seen that all across Canada, that your entire seasons of rain will come in one day. Our landscape and our agriculture really isn't built to deal with that situation. It's such a dynamic system. And so from a climate change or from a weather event standpoint, we need to build our systems to be resilient to that conversation. And again, going back to the stewardship, there's things that we can do. We can modify our farming technology. We can undertake those. But I think that the rest of Canada, I think, needs to understand that this event and this situation really can start to become a food security conversation. It deals with the resilience of the small towns. And so as we look at the changes that we're seeing right now, we're feeling it already. I've seen spring combining. In my entire life, I've never seen spring combining. In my entire life, I've never known that a combine can actually extract seed in snow. And I've seen that over the past 5 years. This is a new reality. In fact, we may have to redesign our combines. We may need to actually redesign our food products to accommodate these changes that are occurring right now. So we need to use the technology. My young kids, I want them to code for agriculture. I want them to get their heads around the fact that actually we can modify our systems to deal with this, because again, going back to food security and export, our number 2 export in Canada is agricultural products. But if you have drought and flood in the same year, if you have a June snow, which as an Albertan, I've seen it before, but if I have more June snow than I normally expect as an Albertan, we need to be able to deal with that and make sure that we can modify our systems to deal with that, because we have a really big situation that we can have an entire region that actually is in exceeding drought and can get hit with multiple pieces, early frost, all these things. So we need to look at it as a system too as well, because resiliency is built in the geographical distribution of our food production networks. And we need to be strategic in how we move forward on those conversations, ensuring that we actually have that security and we start to work together in order to provide the supply, not just for us, but for the world that we feed.
Catherine, I'd like to bring you in and get your thoughts on this as well.
Sure, absolutely. Obviously, from a turkey farmer's perspective, we often hear, use this word, don't use that word. So for the essence of understanding, I will use the word sustainability, because I think most people do understand the basic connection and longevity with that. So sustainability, from my perspective, is a very important of everyday farming. Canadians, obviously, like we have said, want to know where and how their food is produced. And I know that as a farmer, we are very conscious of our environmental, economic, and social sustainability. And obviously, I'm committed, our family farm is very committed to ensuring to do the work necessary to make sure those Canadians have safe, high quality food, and turkeys more specifically to come. It's something that is just natural. For example, manure management, tracking air quality in our barns, making sure that our soil and water around the farm is protected. It's just something that is almost so natural that you think of because it is how you have to be in order to continue on with your farming operation. I'll use composting, for example. I can remember a trend when I was in my teens that was a new concept to compost, reduce, reuse, recycle. And I can think back to my father saying, well, we have the biggest compost pile that, you know, out of anyone out back, because that's just a natural trait. So I'm trying to pass on those things to my children. I'm a mother of 4 girls, and to help them understand the importance of the environmental impact of soil and the fact that soil is one of those magical things that can help the environment. People through the pandemic, I believe, have really connected with cooking from home, baking, and that connection piece, if we can help them with understanding what farmers do at a smaller scale and have them connect with how their food is grown, I think it definitely will then be related. Turkey farmers, for example, they obviously have been surveyed, and we put financial improvements into our operations all the time. But more than 80% of them on the last survey that Turkey Farmers of Canada did indicated investment specifically to improve environmental sustainability. So it's on the radar. I think it's something that, to simply put, we just need to position farmers in a positive light for the 21st century. And there are tried and proven practices that are already being done by Canadian farmers that just need to be supported and worked on, and obviously continuing to be built on.
Well, and this question of climate change is something that came up a lot in the questions submitted at registration too. A lot of questions about how this be handled, how the message of what farmers are actually doing can get out to a broader audience. So Tim and David, we want to get to another poll question, but I'd like to hear briefly from both of you on the issue of climate change just before we move forward.
Sure.
Tim, why don't we go to you first?
All right, thank you. And I'm just going to build on comments that Catherine made. This is, you should know, right down Main Street for poultry and egg producers across the country. We have made tremendous advancements in genetics, in housing, in transportation, in feed efficiency. We sponsor a number of research chairs across Canada. One is in environmental sustainability at the University of British Columbia. And our professor there did a life cycle analysis that showed over the last 50 years, 81% reduction in water use. I'm talking about specifically eggs now, 69% or 68% reduction in greenhouse gases, 41% less energy to produce eggs. So we've got a little slogan that's scientifically accurate. In 50 years, we're producing 50% more eggs using 50% of the resources we did. So the impact has been dramatic, and every one of our commodities are actively engaged in using fewer of the planet's resources to produce their products. It's a commitment. It's something that we're very passionate about.
Yeah, it's clearly having an impact too. David, final thoughts on this question, over to you.
Yeah, just quickly. This is something the farming community has known since day one, and that's good environmental policy is also good economic policy. We spend, and I'll say it, we waste a lot of money, especially in the energy sector, just sending money to other places. So in Nova Scotia, for example, our utility is a monopoly and it's owned by a US company. And so we have very energy inefficient homes. Every dollar you spend on that power leaves the town, the province, the country, and goes to the United States. So if you can start reducing your energy consumption, obviously that leads to a reduction in your carbon footprint, but it also, the money you save, we just won the Smart Cities Challenge for our energy poverty reduction strategy. But what it showed is not only does it reduce the carbon footprint and reduce people's costs of living, and the housing affordability is a big issue, but it also, that money they save is driven right back into your local economy. So for a town like ours, that's only 8,700 people, it's $80 million a year that now doesn't leave the community, which that money is, it's going to buy local, it's going to create new jobs, things like that. The other thing I just want to say is because we're talking about rural communities. And when it comes to rural communities, I think one of the lessons that I think we need to remember is that just because we're small doesn't mean we don't have an impact. And if I can just give you one quick example. So again, we're a town of 8,700 people. I was speaking at a conference and there were engineers from a city called Chennai, India. So that city has 8 million people, 8 million people. So I presented this plan that we won the Smart Cities for, and they came up after and said, well, this solves our environmental issue, our carbon footprint issue, but also our energy poverty issue. So just by sharing that, we're impacting the air for 8 million people, the lives of 8 million people. So I would just challenge anyone who thinks, oh, well, we only have a couple hundred people, or we're only one farm, or whatever it is. Your impact is greater than you think.
Let's move on to our second poll, focused on agriculture. So we're going to bring it up on the screen so that you can see it too. Where do you see local agriculture having the greatest impact on your community? So I'm going to get you to select one now, and just because we're getting a little tight on time and we really want to get again to resilience and innovation in our final moments, I'll have you vote, and we may not go to our panelists for their thoughts right on this one before we get to our next round of questions. But job creation, economic growth, food security, waste reduction, those are your options for this particular poll. Give us a sense of what you think. We'll try to put the poll results up as quickly as we can as we receive them. So why don't we real quickly, hey panel, do you think I can get you to just give one? Given our time constraints, can we get each of you to run us through one pick? I'll start with you, Catherine.
Sure, I'll say job creation.
Okay, Paul?
Food security. People tried to buy my chickens off my farm and almost tried to steal them too. So food security is critical.
Okay, Tim?
Food security would be the one I pick, although I was hunting again for the all of the above button.
Okay, noted. David?
Food security as well, yeah.
Okay. And just by a hair, economic growth is what the general audience is choosing, although food security is clearly a big concern too. Job creation is an issue. Waste reduction a little less, trailing behind at only 3%. And it'd be interesting to see if we had an all of the above, what the results might be for that too. So thank you to our audience for voting on that. Now, each of our panelists brings a unique set of perspectives and experience to the table. So it would be great to hear from you, your thoughts on how rural communities are leading Canada and the world in new and innovative techniques, kind of a positive way for us to wrap up our conversation today. And David, I'll start with you.
I think we're better at that outside the box thinking. I think that's where rural Canada is really leading the charge. I think part of it is that our communities are so close. And so we hear the stories, we know the problems. They're not diluted, they're not going up through multiple committees or whether it's policymakers or bureaucrats. And so we hear from our neighbors and friends on the streets, these are the problems we're facing. And so I think we are quicker, I go back to that nimbleness that we have as smaller communities, and we come up with these innovative solutions, again, because we might not draw the high tech or larger companies. So we come up with these innovative solutions. I look just at, and innovation doesn't necessarily mean technology. I should qualify that. It could just be a different way of thinking. I think of the Annapolis Valley in Nova Scotia, where a decade ago, you would never have said that's going to be, an incredible area for wine.
Yay.
And yet now and now there's a dozen vineyards. It's the tourism sector there is massive. You've got thousands of jobs created, new kind of grape created. Like that is something that a decade ago I think people would have laughed. So I just
if I may make a point, David, I have a bottle of Benjamin's Bridge Nova 7 open in my fridge, just so supporting local industry.
And I think it's, I mean, there you go, right? A decade ago, nobody would have thought that. And so there's countless stories like that from coast to coast to coast, I think.
Catherine?
Sure, definitely. I think from my perspective, it comes back to economic and stability for our farm. And obviously, supply management is something that, as a farmer myself, I can afford to invest in our farm because I know that there is a stable price there for our products. And I appreciate the fact that we can work with the other supply managed groups in order to be represented appropriately. I think, to use a specific example on our farm, we very much are in tune with creating a favorable environment to grow turkeys. So we want to make sure that our practices on farm provide ventilation that is favorable, the barn environment for our toms. So for example, we have a barn that is open curtains, so it allows us to use less energy and smaller fans. That is kind of one area. The other, I think, just being able to invest in things like our on-farm flock care programs, making sure that the health and welfare of our birds are very much top of mind. And these are things that we can, as Canadian farmers, say that we have safe quality food, but also because we can rely on a stable price in order to invest back in those things. And when you look around the world globally, Canadian farmers are second to none with how they are able to raise their animals in an environment that I think is what Canadians want when it comes to their food production. And I think also with the vast majority of Canadians, I think the number was 93%, believe that it is important to them to have meat, dairy, eggs that are produced in Canada. As a mother of 4 girls, I appreciate when there's predictable products in the grocery store. I want to be able to go in and see those Canadian products available on the shelves. So I think just all of those things, by the infrastructure of our supply management system, allows us to truly have our farm, have our family operation, have our girls involved in our farming operation, and look for ways to continue to really grow, innovate, adapt with the changing times, all with the top of mind of making sure that it's safe, quality food that we're producing for the consumer.
Tim, final comments from you briefly as well on this?
Yeah, and I'll just come up. It's a really good segue that Catherine created for me, and that is organizationally and across all of our sectors, we have a tremendous investment in research and innovation. We're founding partners in the Canadian Poultry Research Council, and all of us invest heavily into improving food safety, improving bird health, minimizing the use of antibiotics. And a specific example, Catherine, might be we have a network of research chairs in the egg industry across Canada, one in economics at Laval, animal welfare at the University of Guelph, public policy at Waterloo, and I've already mentioned our environmental sustainability program at UBC. Every farm across this country is inspected regularly for food safety and animal welfare standards. We have third-party auditors that come in to make sure that every farm is doing everything the same way. So, I think it's very safe to say we are not just leaders nationally, but we're world leaders in terms of research, innovation, productivity, simple things like energy use and LED lights, but more sophisticated tools like precision agriculture, just a host of investments and that are really paying off in terms of quality, productivity, and food safety.
Okay, well, Paul, we leave final comments to you then on how rural communities are leading the way in terms of innovation.
Thanks, Catherine, and I'll be super quick, which is really hard for me because I like to talk, as obviously you can tell. And I'll pick up a little piece here, and I'll tell you a story that the fact is that we'll put peas on a container send them to China. China will pull the gluten off and then send us back the protein. We're buying the protein back from the initial product they already have. And so that's inefficient and ineffective. And I think there's tremendous opportunity for value-add agriculture. And I think there's a whole perspective of that, whether it's fiber, whether it's protein, whether it's those other components, whether it's actually biopharmacy, where we can actually start growing goods and services. And I think that we can start looking at that. And there's tremendous innovation. We're starting to see the use of agricultural-based fiber moving into industrial products. We're starting to see this move forward. Single-use plastic conversation. The solution to single-use plastic is found in agriculture. So it's tremendous. We have a tremendous opportunity here. And this innovation is being seen in rural Alberta, and it's being driven by that. And I guess my final point is the market is telling us to do this. And I think that the agriculture is responding tremendously to the market. And the market's asking for, as Catherine and Tim have said, animal husbandry, better use of resources. This is what they're looking for. When they're shopping, when they're using their pocketbook to make decisions, they're looking at good stewards of the land. They're looking at these things from a market decision standpoint. And rural Alberta and rural Canada is responding to that and actually is leading the edge from that, as Tim and Catherine had said. So it's tremendous, exciting time. Agriculture is going to pull us out of this post-COVID. Nothing else will. Agriculture is going to pull us out of COVID.
I really am so grateful to each of you for taking part in today's conversation. You've provided thoughtful comments. You've brought a lot of candor. You have talked about your own personal experiences. You've painted also a very positive picture. There are clearly a lot of things that you're looking to change in a meaningful and positive way as you move forward, but there are also a lot of things that we're doing right, and it's been a fascinating conversation. And I also want to thank everyone in the audience for your participation too. Merci beaucoup d'avoir choisi d'être parmi nous aujourd'hui. You have a lot of calls on your time. You probably sit through a lot of meetings on Zoom and on your computers. So we're grateful that you would take the time to be a part of this conversation today as well. And for submitting questions, hope we got to a lot of them through the comments that we heard today. I'd like to remind you that the session is going to be available on the FCM website, just so that you can relive every magical moment if you wish, or if you missed something, you can go back and listen to and answer again. You can also forward the link to anyone in your circle who you think might be interested in this conversation. We hope you'll choose to do that too. Mais pour l'instant, mesdames et messieurs, je tiens à vous remercier, and I wish each and every one of you a happy, healthy, and productive day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. That was awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thanks, folks.
Excellent,
Safe
guys. Great
travels.
work. Thank you.